Welcome to Breaking the Chain, brought to you by Impel Talent. I'm Nathaniel Chapman.
And I'm Charmaine.
Welcome back to Breaking the Chain. This week, I have an absolutely epic guest, a good friend, a mentor, a coach, and someone who's been involved with our business for some time, Charmaine Reid. She is an epic leadership coach with over 20 years of experience leading in diverse environments across global supply chains. This week, we're going to be discussing about the cultural intelligence, and more importantly, what is a culture map and how can you apply it to leading within your own teams and understanding the people that you lead within them. So I'm very excited to welcome Charmaine.
Thank you. Thanks, Nathaniel.
We are on take number 3. I have almost thrown half the equipment across the room, and we've done this podcast already. So thank you if you've tuned in. If we don't get it right on this take, we have no place in podcasting, I don't think.
No.
So we began this session already, but we began this session discussing cultural intelligence. And I want to come back to a story which we had a workshop at our live leadership event that we hosted here in London 18 months ago. And one of the topics that was absolutely fascinating that you led an entire workshop on was cultural intelligence. And I took so much from that session because it just totally illuminated a piece that I've always been aware of, that I've always had to make adaptations for areas that I'd be working in different parts of Europe and how maybe I would deal with different cultures. But I didn't really get ever a chance to really dig into, well, why? Like, what are we looking at? What's the history? What kind of governments have people lived under? And that session, I remember people walking away and saying it was one of the most amazing sessions that they've attended. For me, it was definitely a very eye-opening experience. So I've been very excited to welcome you onto the show.
Thank you.
I guess not welcome you. Welcome you back.
Welcome you back.
So you've hosted a few of these yourself.
I have.
So let's start with, what is cultural intelligence?
So cultural intelligence is the ability for us to understand where cultures differ. And the intent is really to help us to avoid misunderstandings and be able to collaborate much more successfully.
Yeah, I've really gotten switched on to the fact that cultural intelligence for me has just made such a massive impact. I mean, when you actually look at how you're interacting with people, what are the different cultures within your team and how will they interact? How can organizations really understand how this impact can be rolled across through mergers, acquisitions, day-to-day work? I suppose I can see why it's so critical, why it's something that we should continue to focus on. But why is it from a leadership perspective that companies, individuals should really be taking this seriously?
In this day and age, it's very rare that you have a company that is not got at least one office in a different city or a different country. There's so much more global work environments. And so if we don't understand the difference between cultural intelligence or we don't have cultural intelligence, what we do is we go into every interaction from our own lens. And that in and of itself creates complexity, because we may go into that communication, that interaction, that relationship with our colleagues, or maybe as a leader, you've got to lead a new team, and you're going into that with your own lens and not understanding the differences between how you might do something, how you might communicate, or how you might build trust than the person that you're working with.
Yeah, I think I think this is interesting when you think of organizations and we hire people, we look at values. If you establish right values, their purpose, their mission, and it's interesting that you can come across companies that aren't very diverse, right? They hire people that they like, that they're used to, and you can get these kind of carbon copy. So being emotionally intelligent, you can actually start to understand, we need to hire people with these values, and they can come from any background and situation. And I do think the same could be said for starting to understand cultural intelligence, because people come with their own biases. Really, we view the world through our own lens.
Absolutely.
And our upbringing and our parents' upbringing, our parents' upbringing, and these messages that have fallen down from legacy actually impact our behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is why it is so important to understand that this is how I think and this is where I come from, but it doesn't mean that you have the same approach and that you might think the same. Um, I gave an example in our earlier podcast around when I first came to the UK. So I am South African and I came to the UK over 24 years ago. And I am an English speaker. So I come from an English speaking family in South Africa and came to the UK with my own lens that the communication style here was the same. It didn't take long, shall we say, for me to realize that some of my communication was lost in translation because we have a different cultural differences here, the
Yeah.
South African way versus the UK. And so I think it would have helped me very early on in my integration of moving to the UK if I'd had that understanding that even though we speak the same language, we actually have a different way that we do things. We build trust in a different way. So that's been a really helpful for me to start to learn more about cultural intelligence, which then helps your relationships and the way that you work, with your colleagues.
I had a similar experience because, interestingly, I was born in the UK but grew up in the States. So I always felt like I had some affiliation with England, but I was not, I was grown up and brought up around Americans.
Mm,
And when I moved back here, I also felt that same, just, certain things just don't land the same way.
mm,
The way you might say a phrase or a joke or your humor. And funny enough, because you'd think English American would be the easiest
yeah,
transition historically. And actually, it took me years to really properly adapt. And I found that really fascinating. It is interesting. I said there are just little things. We were chatting around this, but these nonverbal communication. It's funny, like Americans, for instance, the sarcasm is very different.
mm,
That was a hard thing for me to get used to. English sarcasm can be very deadpan.
mm,
Someone can be very sarcastic, but not and American sarcasm is very over the top sarcastic. So my friends used to take advantage of that a lot
yeah,
because I think they probably just thought I was quite thick for a long time. But it does get you to start think of like, well, communication, a majority of it is nonverbal.
yeah,
It's through body language, tone of voice, eye contact. And these little pieces that feed into the overall message can be very different from culture to culture. And I think that it's usually where communication breaks down is where you start to see those micro conflicts.
yeah.
I mean, I would say that it's silly that communication is always such a big topic, but surely that's where the root of most people think that someone's taken something the wrong way or is upset with them or they're pissed off and actually they've something has been lost in
Yeah,
translation.
absolutely, absolutely. So I'll go back a moment to the workshop, obviously, that you alluded to
Yeah.
was based on the culture map by Erin Mayer. So Erin Mayer is a professor at INSEAD, and her team did years of research across hundreds, thousands of cultures, and mapped out 8 different categories. And the intent there was to look at where the cultures differ, with that understanding or in order to avoid misunderstanding, and then and for people and cultures to be able to collaborate more successfully. And communication is, of course, one of the first in the scale, unsurprisingly. And so in the culture map, she has cultures mapped across a scale. And with the communication, you've got direct and indirect communication. So the US sits all the way over on the direct communication. And what she talks about in the book is very much about the relative positioning. So the UK is not all the way over here on the indirect communication, but it's certainly not here with on the direct communication. So it's the relative position of where the UK is compared to the US. So yet to answer your question, there is difference between the way that the cultures communicate, and I think that is first and foremost the fundamental part of any interaction that we have, especially if we are talking about this language that we have adopted globally that not everybody speaks as their first language. So it brings all that additional complexity of nuance, of misunderstanding in communication.
Well, and I always bring it back because I've worked a lot in the Netherlands, and I think maybe there's probably a level of reason why I could work well and build a lot of business there. Very direct culture as well. They're
Yes.
actually, I think they're even further along the direct comms than the Americans, which is a shock. But it is funny to see it because there are times where it can be blunt directness, and I love it. I'm actually a person that it's funny because I'll have Dutch clients or colleagues who go, "Is that a bit too direct for you?" I'm like, "No, please keep." I love direct communication, but it's been interesting to see that some of those characteristics for different countries means that they can collaborate a little bit more easily because not more naturally you're feeding into that communication style. Or as you mentioned, it's more um, Brits are more on the left, which I find interesting. Like people, like when you're at dinner and someone's like, "This food is awful," and then the waiter comes round, and they're like, "How's your meal?" And they're like, "Oh my god, amazing!" And his mistake should be like, "I don't like it. It's not. I'd
Yeah.
like to send it back. Can I?
Yeah.
Can we get a refund or whatever?" And it's just very normal. And I
Yeah.
remember, and now I do it now.
Mm.
So I've been pulled in and adapted to the English model, but it's been cool to see how that works when you've got cultures that are kind of well aligned on that
Yeah.
map.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some of the other, because you mentioned before the other categories? What are some of the other categories that
Some of
Aaron
the
may
other
have?
categories that Erin has mapped out is how cultures persuade. So
Mm.
this is one that we did in the workshop, and I know I've actually done it also with another company at the beginning of the year, and it landed really well. So the company I was doing it with was actually a sales team, and what we did was we looked at how different cultures persuade. So looking at those cultures that might prefer a theoretical approach. Um, so it's really understanding when you're going into a negotiation or a persuasion, it's who am I working with and what is the best approach to working with this particular decision maker, shall we say. The other one is decision making. So how do cultures make decisions? Is there a difference between, the different cultures? Building trust was a great one because, again, coming to this country with my own lens, I just assumed we build trust in the same way. So some cultures build trust when they know what you can do. So, again, a great example with the US is that we work together. I see the work you do. I trust you. Therefore, you're trustworthy. Other cultures would say, I know you, I know your family, I know, people who know you, so other people have recommended you, therefore we build trust that way. So important to get an understanding of how they build trust in different ways.
It's interesting because I would imagine if you're, again, we've pulled it back because in the States it's kind of a newer country
Mm,
in view
yeah,
of the world.
yeah,
But I suppose because people would have moved to the US and not had those deeper family ties
yes,
that other cultures would have, you
yes,
did have to be like, show me what you can do. And then I
absolutely,
can build that relationship.
yeah.
And similarly, we've talked about the direct communication styles because you had such a mesh of
Mm,
different
mm,
countries and people, the melting pot of the world. You had to probably use pretty basic English at times to get your point across.
yeah.
Whereas if you're coming from a very old culture, Chinese or Italian, or you've got a lot more of that, not like say nonverbal
Yeah,
um,
so much more.
subtext.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what Erin talks about is about this indirect communication with those cultures like Japan, for instance. It's so old in their culture that, often things are read between the lines. We don't have to explicitly explain to each other what we mean because we get each other.
Mm.
So that's nuanced. And the complexity in communication comes when you have two indirect communication style cultures that are communicating in a language like English, where you are then looking for the subtext underneath the surface and it's not there and it doesn't exist. But the complexity. So, what is it this person's trying to say?
Yeah.
And that's where she recommends the default would be then to go into more of a direct communication style. And I don't mean direct in the example you gave around the Dutch, but more around the contextual. So explicit, this is what I am saying, but you can do it within a tone, so that then still lands how that culture may perceive that tone to be.
That totally makes sense. It's interesting the more, because when you then have, I find that once you start to study this or read a book or take a workshop, I think I hyper analyze different interactions I have. Especially, I've always had a very multinational team, whether people have come from Eastern Europe, the Mediterranean, the United States, South, all over the world, South Africa. All right.
You've got a
So
big South African team, don't forget.
and every time I do think, how can I communicate this in a way that's going to, like I say, build trust or allow them to feel comfortable, but make sure I get the right behaviors. I think as a leader, your job is to drive the right behaviors. And sometimes communication is about getting people to do the right actions in the best way possible, feeling the most comfortable. And I explain this to a lot of people when we've talked about why empathy is so critical, or why people should focus on emotional intelligence, because you're focusing on the individual and their personal experiences and their natural attributes and personality traits. But then you can also take a step back and look at, well, actually, what's the context of this person and what have they grown up in the environment? And how can I make sure I adapt my message to fit?
Yeah.
Or for multilingual speakers, where someone's, you also takes another step. It's not exactly the same, but if you've learned English in Italy or in France, or you can sometimes, it's not your first language, so you're struggling to communicate by bridging the gap between your two cultures, and then trying to juggle that, I suppose.
Yeah, I did. That just made me giggle, because I remembered I used to teach English as a foreign language in Hong Kong. And my husband says, all those children growing up in Hong Kong who have South African accents. That just made me giggle when you said that.
When we look at that, because I think one of the things that came to my mind earlier today as we were preparing for the episode was the balancing act between studying and recognizing the importance of cultural intelligence, and also not wanting to generalize too much or, stereotype. And I think someone might listen to this and go, these feel like broad, not accusations, because I think that's not the right word, but these seem like broad statements about different cultures that you're leaning into. How do you balance the three?
Yeah, it is. It is challenging. I think the approach is, again, to meet people where they are. So meet them as individuals. So not making an assumption that I'm from South Africa, therefore this is what I believe, or this is how, that I may be communicating to you. Or I have lived in the UK for a long time. I lived in Switzerland. I traveled, as I said, I lived in Hong Kong. I've traveled all over the world. I come with a multicultural lens. I come as me. So the challenge let's just step back. The beauty of cultural intelligence starts with awareness. And that to me is what CQ is all about, right? So we talk about IQ, EQ, and CQ. So CQ is about just taking the awareness of that individuals may be different, and then starting to understand that person and where they are. And I know when I've had this conversation before in workshops, and people are, will say, not people, that's a generalization again, but a person said to me, that sounds really complex. I've got a big team, and now I've got to spend all this time getting to know, or this person from this culture and this person from this culture. And I think it comes back to something you said earlier, that, as leaders, our responsibility is to, get the best out of and the most out of the people that we work with and we lead with. So it is your responsibility to get to understand and meet the people we work with where they are at, and not just to say, oh, because you come from this culture, therefore you will think like this or behave like this or communicate like that. Where I come from, I'm actually quite a less direct communicator than some of my other South African colleagues. But I know when I first came to the country, people would go, your communication's quite harsh. And actually I would say, but where I come from, that's not like, my nickname was Mouse growing up. I had quite a small voice. So that was quite shocking to me. So again, I felt there was a lot of generalization in that, and stereotyping and, oh, you're a South African, therefore it's important to meet people, yeah, where they are.
Yeah, and I think it's like, what's the purpose of those three things, right? So when people are maybe using generalizations or stereotypes, it's the purpose of it is not, it's not it's not got a positive outlook. It's an idea of, it's got a negative context to it, or it obviously is being used in really negative ways, whether you see it on the news by authorities or by
Mm,
TSA or whatever. And that's where people get this idea of, oh well, you look a certain way, so you must act or be a certain way. And I think when you look at cultural intelligence, the difference, for me, is the purpose is you want to, as you meet someone and
mm,
get to know them and allow them to be sharing with you more about their culture and have
mm,
taking an interest in things that make them tick or change, or because the idea is that you want to further your relationship and build a stronger bond, and like I say, meet in the middle. So you gave a great answer, but I wanted to add that I think when you think of what is the outcome you're looking for, is it to put someone down? And it's probably stereotyping. If it
mm.
is, I'm trying to bridge the gap. Realistically, you're taking a keen interest in cultural
Yeah,
intelligence,
yeah,
and that was my fear. I think it's, where could it be misused, and then you start slipping. Does it reinforce a bias rather than open the door to communication?
yeah.
What do you think leaders are like, some of the challenges leaders are facing managing multicultural teams?
Mm.
Or maybe are some of the issues that could arise, from people coming from various different backgrounds,
Yeah.
from clients you've worked with, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. In my own experience, I've managed teams in multiple countries, and again, I didn't have I want to say the cultural intelligence that I have now, and I really wish I did, because I could have avoided misunderstanding. I would have been able to move things along faster. I would have been able to help my teams across those different cultures also to be able to understand that perhaps we were putting a British lens on, this is what I expect, or this is how I expect you to do it. And so I think even just with my own experience, that cultural intelligence would have helped to alleviate some of the complexity that comes with working, and cross culturally as well. There's the added element that we are not sitting in the same office. So the first large pharmaceutical company that I worked for, we were at this early stages, we were all in one building. And I want to say that was brilliant, but it was only from the lens of, when you needed to talk to somebody, you walked across the office and you had a conversation with them. Didn't matter if I was in regulatory and they were in quality, they were around the corner. And we were able to communicate because they were not only around the corner, but we also could speak with the same uh, cultural lens and communication style. The complexity came when the company grew and we started to move our offices all over the world. Not only were you no longer in the office around the corner from me, but I also needed to then understand why I wasn't getting what I used to out of the person I did around the corner. And I didn't have the intelligence to do that. So I think that is the value of having that intelligence, but also, to answer your question on the challenge, is one of the challenges.
Yeah, I think so interesting to think that as a leader, your job is to try and minimize downtime and drive productivity. So every moment a team member is stressed or sat at home, as upset about an email the way that it's been received, or thinks that someone's being rude that may not actually be rude, it's downtime.
Mm,
Stress and downtime kill productivity. I'm sure we've all been there when you've either been home yourself and been flustered with a work colleague, or vice versa, your partner is carrying all that stress, not being able to decompress when they come home. And I think the more that you can actually bridge a lot of those gaps and reduce those micro conflicts, or massive conflicts in some cases, the more that your team can be more effective. And I just think you were mentioning the remote working and the hybrid piece. I think this is also making things more complex. And I think a big part of the cultural intelligence piece is the ability to be a bit vulnerable, and for someone to be genuinely interested in your background. Because I definitely would say, as an earlier leader, I struggled with certain cultures that I thought their style of communication was just rude.
Mm.
It was either just brazen to me as a leader, and I took things personally because in my lens, I'd be like, I would never speak like that, or I would never give that kind of direct message. And it took time for me to step, as I went through my own leadership journey of being able to go, okay, you've got to try and understand it a bit more and ask more questions.
Mm.
And I think this brings me to my next point, because I'd love to say, what are some everyday practices that people can utilize to help drive conversations around cultural intelligence? I'm sure one is you could buy the book and read Aaron Grant. Two, you could hire Charmaine. But I
I'm
think
no expert.
I love the asking questions piece,
Yeah.
seeking to understand, which we do in a lot of our big part of the coaching, but
Mm.
sometimes being a little bit like, hey, the way that was communicated to me, the way I received that was like this. Is that how you intended it? Now they might say yes, and then you're like, oh, I do hate this person. But I bet you'd be really surprised that people are actually surprised that it landed with you that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You've touched on a few things there. The first one I wanted to say, and you used the word earlier, adapt, and I want to just carry on from that, is adaptive leadership. So adaptive leadership really is about that flexibility, that ability to be able, again, to not just meet the person where they are at, but also to be able to be curious, to ask open questions. And the coaching style questions really come into play here. So you're asking questions from a place of curiosity and a place of wanting to learn and understand, but also to remove assumption. So I actually talked about this in a LinkedIn post earlier this week, that assumption really is the silent saboteur of communication. And if we don't have the courage to ask the question, sorry, what was it that you meant? Or this is what I heard you say. Can I just be clear that that is what you are actually saying? We can remove so much of that late night emails, or not sleeping at night because you're really stressed about something that you read and the way you understood it, when actually that was not the intent of the person who may have said something or written something in a language that's not their own, but also that in their cultural style, that is just how they might communicate. So yeah, so I think, to answer your question, going into these environments with these opportunities with really being curious and open, asking nice open questions.
Yeah, it's almost like when people they'd say there almost used to be a management training that I got in an earlier company. I won't say where, but and it'd be like, you need to express yourself on how something made you feel, because you can't argue. And their argument was, because people can't argue with your feelings, whereas if it's factual, you
Yeah.
could say you were late. It's like, no, I wasn't late. There was this, but actually, when you did that, it made me feel this way. Now, that's not really the best way to apply this. It's not supposed to be as some sort of tool to circumvent management. But what I do like is when you can express to somebody how you've received something or how it's made you feel. And there is a level of vulnerability with it
Yeah.
as a leader that made me feel insecure, not, that you were not aligned or upset with me or pissed off with me.
Mm.
It gives someone the ability to go, that was not my intention.
Yeah.
And then it kind of can allow that bridge to happen. And it still is difficult, because I think even when you ask that question in your mind, a lot of people are still viewing it with their own bias, and they're like, I'd still think it's the way, the delivery,
Yeah.
and the structure. So I think there's definitely an element. I say, be curious, ask questions. I would say take a genuine interest. Like, really, I think that sometimes people can feel like, and I was watching a TV series, it's called Silicon Valley. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
It's a comedy show about a tech startup in Silicon Valley, and there's a character on there called Eric Bachman, and he has like a kimono and really respects Japanese culture, and everyone in the house thinks it's quite like, hey, you shouldn't maybe communicate that way. But actually, when he delivers this kimono to like a Japanese delegation, and because he's done his research, they're all really embarrassed that he's doing this in this episode. They're like, this is going to blow the deal. This is going to blow. And it's actually the reason they land the deal, because it was done in a way that is like, I'm trying to, or I am understanding your culture, and I'm trying to make you feel comfortable for us to take this
Place
next
of
step.
respect, a place of, again, trying to meet you where you're at. Even if I don't get it right, I tried.
Yeah, again, the purpose. What's the purpose?
Mm,
What is your purpose or mission behind what you're doing? Oh, it's me to make the delegation feel more comfortable.
mm.
You're on the right step. If it's some in other aspect, and I think people are also afraid of putting themselves out there and being vulnerable
Yeah,
themselves in that scenario.
absolutely. Because it is such a minefield of, every time you're interacting with someone, it's, am I using hand gestures that might come across as offensive in your country? Is it, so yeah, it is a minefield. And I think the important thing is not to put the onus completely on the other person. So, I as a leader don't start going, well, in your culture, how do I do this? How do I do that? Um, it is my responsibility to educate myself, but I can also do it in a way where I come from a place of curiosity. So, a really great question you could ask is something around, when your team needs to make an important decision, what usually works best for you? So it's a way for me to be curious, but not to say, oh, in your culture, how do you make decisions? Because you'd be like,
Don't do that.
I don't know, because how many of us have actually stopped to think, how do we make decisions? But if I ask you from a place of what usually works best for you, it's not just meeting you in a stereotypical way, it's meeting you where you are at.
Yes, I love that. I think that's something for people to take away from. I know you've been emphasizing it, and I think it's just so important. Um, and I think it's making people just being aware, and that's where the things like the book, like the culture map, are really incredible resources. Or doing your own research, even if it's not something where you need to be like Eric Bachman on the show and get in a kimono and do your thing, but being somebody who goes, do you know what, I just wanted to learn a little bit more about that culture, and for someone like me, I'm a big historian buff. I love it anyway. I really enjoyed it when we were doing the exercise about what role history has to play in people's cultures,
Yeah.
which is so obvious when you think about it. What kind of government systems have they lived under? What sort of histories have they experienced? So which makes it more fun for me to read up on history
Yeah.
and see how it impacts those things. But that awareness can make you start to realize I should maybe just not take this at surface value, because perception is just my view of this interaction, and like say dig a bit deeper.
Yeah.
What do you think? Because you touched on it with international teams now. We are so globalized, and there used to be a time where you're right. We'd probably move all of our team to one location. So you'd have a globalized team. They'd be like, we're setting up in, I don't know, were you Basel? Were you
In Zurich.
Zurich? I knew I'd get it wrong. Zurich was first. You say we're going to put an office here, so we relocate the staff there, and it might be multicultural, but you have more face-to-face interaction, and sometimes that can help limit those issues because you get to know each other a lot faster. You're spending a lot more time together, and probably in this case, loads of people were relocating from different parts of the world.
Yeah.
So you become that friendship base to make those stretches. Now everyone is in these hybrid and remote working environments. How do you think that's impacting? You were touching on it already. The
Yeah.
ability to build and bridge those networks. So I think that's probably one, if people are listening now are going, that's all great, but I'm on a Zoom call with this person once a week or once every 2 weeks. How am I supposed to field this kind of conversation?
Yeah. Yeah, I think my advice would be, again, coming from a place of curiosity. And again, maybe I'll give you an example of how I wish I had had this cultural intelligence. So, in my last role in corporate before I pivoted into leadership development coaching, I was responsible for a project where we were setting up a communication strategy across Japan, China, and Europe. And I was leading the project. And again, I went in with my own lens. So pulled this team together, really wonderful people had volunteered to be part of the team. And it was very evident very early that we weren't moving things along as, shall we say, as fast as I had assumed we would. And what I understand now, so my leadership style is very warm, it's very collaborative. I'm not hierarchical. Anyone who knows me, despite my job title, knows you can come and have a conversation with me, and I'm completely, would just love to meet people from, doesn't matter what level you are. And I didn't appreciate what that might look like in a culture like in Japan or in China. So with the Japanese team, what I should have done was be a little bit more appreciative that there's a consensus around how they make decisions. So when things were taking a lot longer to make to get a decision, and I couldn't understand why haven't we decided on this and this, and who's coming to speak at this and this. It's because they do more of a consensus of decision making. So they go up the chain, and this layer of leadership will agree, or management will agree, and then it goes up and it goes up. So things take a little bit longer. Whereas with the Chinese team, what I should have been again is more decisive, because they appreciate a more decisive level of leadership. So you can come to the place from a place of collaboration, but there's a point where you need to be more directive. I didn't have this knowledge and this intelligence. So to answer your question, when we're working across these hybrid teams and these global teams, all of that was being done online through Zoom, through Teams. And I think this, for me, the same approach, we should take the same approach. It's coming to a place of, I'm the leader, I know what I need to get out of my team. It's my responsibility to ask questions and to start to learn about the people that I am working with to get the best out of the project.
Yeah. And long term means that you're going to meet those deadlines because you're aware of that timeline and decision making process. You're not coming into it, late and going, well, what do we do now? How can we speed this up? And there are so many different facets towards, like, it's quite interesting you're mentioning the Chinese again, but I thought it was interesting when you look into deeper, okay, so why is it that there's a bit more direct nature? I think we talked about this with a few cultures that have been over time been through communism or dictatorships, and actually they would be more used to more direct, being given direction. And I was like, that's actually fascinating, because over time, that probably is just how it is.
Yeah.
Got to go do this, got to do this. Whereas maybe in other more democratic, longer term democratic cultures, people want to have a round table and a discussion, and people feel more comfortable in that kind of environment. And that's also important, because we talk around cultural changes when we do values project or mission projects. And we've talked about this with some of the larger values rollouts we've done for large organizations. I've said it's very important that you involve the team, because you can't just tell someone who their values are. You've got to be getting input. And that comes down to a lot of cultural piece. Even if people come into a round table and just feel heard, even if the values come out that have nothing to do with what they've put on that table, they'll feel involved and engaged.
Absolutely.
Whereas maybe in another culture, I would be happy for you to drive ahead and move forward. It wouldn't have had as big of an effect on me. And it's those things, when you kind of understand those things, it means you can adapt to your
adaptive leadership. Absolutely. And I think that is really for me, the crux of how you approach cultural intelligence is through adaptive leadership.
This has been terrific. I could speak to you about this forever. And we've done 2 episodes as well, so we've been speaking about it forever. What do you? I've got 2 last questions, and I think I hope they're thought provoking. But I think a lot of these topics are becoming a bit more prevalent now in the last 5 to 10 years. Where people weren't really, and maybe some people still aren't sure what emotional intelligence is. And if you're not, please check out our previous podcasts. And cultural intelligence is becoming a thing. And I think there's obviously this drive for deeper human understanding. My first question to that is, what do you think's next? And do you think there's more to come from uncovering a lot of this stuff? And then my last question will be, what's a piece of advice you wish you could have had, given now all the leadership experience that you've had, the cultural workshops you've led, the massive workshops you've led at Impel? What is something maybe as a piece of advice as an early leader you'd have said, if I'd had this knowledge with dealing with a multicultural team, although we've probably given it over the last hour, is there a last piece of nugget you might leave someone with?
Yeah, so you asked me 2 questions there.
Yeah,
so that's a
Just
double-edged
really
question.
difficult.
So to answer your first question, which was, what do I think is coming? I don't have an answer to that. What I'm seeing, and I know that the coaches that we have at Impel are seeing as well, because it's something we talk about, is much more openness to delve into the self-awareness. So, that comes from the emotional intelligence, but it's the fundamental piece of people being much more open now to understanding, because we know that we cannot lead others if we can't lead ourselves first. And in order to lead ourselves, we need self-awareness. So I think what we are seeing is more of a trend of openness to understand self. to answer your first question. The second question, I would
Before you get
say,
to the second one, let me add, because I should have broken up the questions. I got excited because we made it through 2 episodes. I think there's an interesting thing about that self-awareness, because I do feel like there's a lot that people, I think you're spot on. And I think a lot of people are more, and this even comes down to, you did the Mustache November at
I
member of
did
episodes.
do November.
I think there is a lot more of a drive for people to speak about their feelings and have deeper focus on them as a person and feel comfortable sharing. I think there's definitely, we've discovered that people want to do that. I think there is also still the challenge that organizations and bigger corporates have in fact lost some of that trust. Hence why companies like ours can exist, because I think having that outside coach and that ability, we've seen it because everyone that goes through one of our programs really opens up. I mean, I hate to say it's like 100%. This isn't an advertisement, but it's like everyone who goes through it, even no matter how resilient they are to it at first, gets to a point where they've opened up and feel better for it. And I think it's a key part of human nature. And I don't want to go back into the anthropology piece because I bring it up every episode, and I'm sure someone's like, this guy's addicted to studying Homo sapiens. But we were so used to, I think, having such vulnerability before our evolution with small groups of deeply personal and human connection. And at some point, 50,000 years ago, we went through a bit with our linguistics and our ability to imagine and create. And so we could communicate and operate in very large groups. And this changed the game, because now all of a sudden it's not your tribe or your family. We're now operating as companies, countries, organizations. And I think in the last 10 to 15, 20, I'd say since the Industrial Revolution, I don't think we've not always seen companies operate in our best interest. So there is this fear of being vulnerable because it's viewed as a weakness. We talked about it in previous episodes as a leader, but also now thinking that your culture, your background could also be used against you. But I would say, hopefully, if you've taken something from this episode, it's about trying to build that safe environment for your team. And we talk about that through psychological safety, another one of our podcasts. But then being able to really explore those subjects, it can just drive such great collaboration.
And honestly, I believe it's a gift you give your future self. If you can start to create that self-awareness, so the clue is in the self, right? You're gaining awareness of yourself. How do I show up in these environments? Why do I show up like this? Why do I respond in this way? Then you are more able to work in this complex and, well, the VUCA world. It's much more, it's much easier to navigate VUCA when you have come from a place of self-awareness.
So now you can get back to your piece of advice. Sorry,
my piece of advice on the second question is really something I've reiterated throughout. And again, something that I wish that I had when I worked in the global corporates is around that really meeting people where they are at.
Fantastic. Charmaine, this has been terrific. I can't believe we made it through 2 recordings. I thought we wouldn't mentally make it at first, but we've made it. If you guys are interested to learn more about the amazing work that Charmaine's doing, you can go on our website, go to the Impel Talent Meet the Team page. Charmaine's there. She has her own consultancy as well, works very well alongside us through large programs. She is absolutely incredible, and I absolutely recommend you reach out and connect with her. And I'll definitely be getting you back on the show because I missed this, actually.
Thank you. Well, next time it may be me interviewing you because, you can't always, the shoe can't always be on the other foot. So there we go.
Well, then the equipment might all work properly that time
yes,
too.
I'll be back.
And please, if you guys are interested, check out our website. You can follow us on all major podcast platforms. And we are also now on YouTube, which I think made me and Charmaine a little bit more nervous about this episode.
That's something he actually didn't mention to me before we started.
Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us for our latest episode of Breaking the Chain. If you'd like to see more episodes, you can check us out online at www.impeltalent.com/podcast. And if you'd like to perhaps put a question into us or be featured on one of our next episodes, you can email us at info@impeltalent.com. Thank you for tuning in and see you next week.